My peach cobbler with canned peaches recipe is easy and delicious. Made with simple ingredients like self-rising flour and peaches in heavy syrup, this old-fashioned southern dessert is one that everyone is sure to love. Let's go over the ingredients. For a 9x13 baking dish, you will need 3 15-ounce cans of peaches in heavy syrup, 2 with the juice, 1 drained, 1 cup of self-rising flour, as I measure 150 grams, 1 cup of white sugar, 210 grams, 1 cup of milk, 240 grams. I'm using whole, but you can use whatever you want, and 1 stick of butter, 113 grams. I'm using unsalted, but you can use salted if you want. Although you only need those basic ingredients for this dessert, if you want to take it to the next level, I recommend adding to the peaches a 1/4 cup of light brown sugar, 60 grams, 1 tablespoon of lemon juice, half a teaspoon of cinnamon, a 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg, and 1/8 of a teaspoon of cloves, along with 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt if you are using unsalted butter. If you're using salted butter, just leave it out. And then to the batter, 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. As you can see, I have everything I need. My baking dish is already greased, so we can get started. The first step is melting the butter. Some people just put their butter in the pan and put it in the oven at 350 to melt, but I am going to melt it in the microwave. I'm just going to take my butter. I've already cut it into chunks. I'm just going to put it into this measuring cup and melt it in the microwave. So once that's done, I'll bring you back. My butter is melted. It took 3 increments of 20 seconds. So now I'm going to move on to making the batter. Now bring over this bowl. Like I said, just a few ingredients. 1 cup of self-rising flour, sugar, and milk. And then the optional ingredient, 1 teaspoon of vanilla. If all you have is all-purpose flour, you can still make this. Just take your 1 cup of all-purpose flour and then add 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder and 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And then just stir to combine like I am. Your batter should have the consistency of pancake batter, so it is totally fine if it has some lumps in it. That is exactly what you want. So once it's thoroughly mixed, just set it off to the side. And now pour your butter into your 9x13 baking dish. Like I said earlier, you definitely could melt the butter in the oven. Just put your stick in the pan and then put that into the oven at 350 for maybe 5 to 10 minutes. But if you do that, you have to be very careful about not burning it, because if you burn your butter, it's going to get bitter. So if you're afraid of doing that, I recommend just melting it in the microwave. It's a lot safer. So once your butter is in the pan, just move it around to distribute it evenly. Now that the butter is in the pan, it is time to pour in the batter. So what you're going to do is just take your bowl and pour it in as evenly as possible. So just move across the pan like this, trying to distribute it evenly. Doesn't have to be perfect, just try to do the best that you can. And very importantly, do not mix. It is okay if you see your batter clumping in one part of the pan. You could try and even it out a little bit, but do not mix. You are not making a cake. Do not mix the batter and the butter together completely. You want to just pour it in exactly how I did. With the batter in the pan, it's time to move on to the peaches. Now, like I said, you don't want to mix and you want to distribute everything as evenly as possible. So instead of just dumping the peaches in, I would take a fork or a spoon, and you don't have to be perfect, but just try to distribute the peaches as evenly as you can. I'm starting off with the can that I drained. Like I said, do not have to be perfect. And also you don't want to just dump them in, because if you do, your batter is gonna splash everywhere. So just take your time and put the peaches in somewhat evenly. Like I said earlier, you could just put your cobbler into the oven like this, but if you want to take it to the next level, sprinkle on a 1/4 cup of light brown sugar. That hint of molasses is really gonna go very nicely with the peaches. You don't need a lot, just a little bit. It's gonna go a really long way in amping up the flavor. I know this looks kind of soupy right now, but trust me, the batter is gonna bake up around the fruit, around the sliced peaches. So if your cobbler looks like this, don't worry, it is not ruined. Now a little bit of lemon juice. This is to help bring out the fruit flavor. I love to add lemon juice to my cobblers and pies, things like that. Anything with fruit, it really helps to bring out the flavor and make it taste better, especially if you're using canned fruit. My spices, like I said, 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon, 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg, and 1/8 teaspoon of cloves. Sprinkle them in as best you can. You could also add a bit of ginger if you wanted, maybe a 1/4 teaspoon, but honestly, I think these spices are perfect. The spice quantities I'm giving you are on the conservative side. They won't overpower the cobbler, but if you like a really well-spiced southern peach cobbler, I would double the quantities that I gave you. Because I'm not using salted butter. And now my cobbler is ready for the oven. I'm going to put it in at 350 degrees Fahrenheit, uncovered. I'll let you know for how long. I just pulled my peach cobbler out of the oven. It was in at 350 degrees Fahrenheit, uncovered, for 1 hour and 15 minutes. "75 minutes. It looks and smells incredible. As you can see, my cobbler turned out perfectly golden brown with plenty of cakey crust and lots of juice underneath. Usually, I let my desserts cool down all the way before trying them, but with this type of dessert, I think it's best served while it's still warm. So, after letting it cool down for about half an hour, I dove in. And when I cut the first slice and took the first bite, I knew that my easy peach cobbler with canned peaches recipe was a big success because it was absolutely delicious. First of all, let's talk about the flavor. The peach flavor was surprisingly strong for using canned peaches and heavy syrup, the bit of lemon juice really helping to bring out their flavor. The spices were present as well, but not overpowering, just enough to make the fruit filling interesting without competing against it. The cakey crust had a hint of butter, but that wasn't the dominant flavor like with a dump cake. Instead, it had more of a neutral flavor that let the peaches and spices shine through. I also really liked the contrast of textures. Using canned peaches and heavy syrup helped thicken the filling, and with some of the flour that came off the topping, the filling thickened even more. The bottom of the crust was soft and moist, while the top was thicker with a slight bit of crunch around the edges. Honestly, I felt like the cobbler had the perfect amount of juicy filling and cakey topping, neither one dominating the dessert. I also liked the amount of peaches in this dessert. I did some research on this, and the other recipes I found online that were similar to mine, most of them I honestly felt like they didn't have quite enough fruit. It was more of a cakey topping, but by increasing the peaches to 3 15-ounce cans instead of just 2 or 1 29-ounce can, I felt like that added enough fruit. And since I drained the juice off of the third can, I didn't make it too wet. Like I said, it was just perfect. And to top everything off, this was super easy to make. Based on the cuppa cobbler recipe, 1 cup each of self-rising flour, sugar, and milk, along with canned peaches and heavy syrup and some optional spices. This dessert was absolutely fantastic, and it tasted like it took a lot longer and a lot more ingredients than it actually did. Although I was extremely pleased with how my rendition of the Southern classic turned out, there are a couple things I wanted to point out. Like I showed earlier in the video, you definitely can put your butter into the pan and then put your casserole dish into the oven to melt the butter that way. But if you forget about it, you might burn the butter. So if you want to be on the safe side, especially if you're a beginner cook, I recommend melting the butter in the microwave. I also think it's important to carefully ladle in the peaches and juice, not just dump them in, because as you might have seen, if you just toss them in, the batter will splash and you will make a mess. But honestly, this recipe is pretty forgiving. The only thing you need to keep in mind is to not mix. Just lay the ingredients in on top of the last one and do not mix together. On a side note, one thing I did want to mention is that this is a good example of how important having a video recipe is, because at various points in making the cobbler, like when I was making the batter and it was lumpy, or when I was putting everything together at the end and it looked really watery, you might think that your recipe was ruined, that your cobbler would be a disaster, but it was actually on the right track. So it's always good to know what something should look like when you're going to make a recipe for the first time. So that's why I think something like my video is so helpful. And one final thing, normally I like to eat my cobblers plain, but a cakey cobbler like this is absolutely perfect for ice cream, and I'm glad that I added some. The slightly melted vanilla ice cream paired perfectly with the peaches, the syrup, and the cakey crust, so definitely make sure that you have some ice cream when you serve this. In short, this old-fashioned Southern peach cobbler with canned peaches recipe was a big success. So I hope you give this recipe a try. As always, thanks for watching. See you next time.